Hello, I am Lakshmi Challa, and I am here today to talk to you about franchise solutions for immigrant entrepreneurs. This particular webinar is, or YouTube show, is dedicated to complement the Chai Time webinar that we had today on franchise solutions with our special guest for our Chai Time, Shekar Challa from Transworld Advisors, the world, I guess, top business sales consultants in terms of selling or buying businesses or franchises. So we were able to talk earlier on Chai Time about, the practical aspects of purchasing a franchise, what you should look out for, and what are some of the types of things that you need to consider before purchasing a franchise. In this webinar, we're going to be talking about the immigration side. What are some things that you need to look out for? So when talking about, the various immigration options for, leveraging franchises, some of the things you want to think about is, let's say you're on OPT and you don't have a valid job offer in this economic downturn, and you're not in one of those academic programs for entrepreneurship. So you don't have a ready startup that you want to, embark on with the infrastructure and support you get from the entrepreneur programs. And then once you have the OPT, and let's say you are able to franchise, what's next? What's the pathway? Can you sponsor yourself for an H-1B if you also own the franchise? Second, what may be some other options? E-2 visa for investment. Would money that you put into a franchise be construed as an investment? And then if you're from a country, remember E-2s is, for those of you who don't know, is a treaty-based visa. And not all countries have a treaty with the United States that can, benefit from the E-2. So what happens if you're from a country that perhaps is not an E-2 country? Does that mean you're precluded from, utilizing the E-2? Are there other options for you? And then finally, using a franchise for an L-1A. L-1A is a multinational visa, so there's got to be an overseas entity and a U.S. entity. But a lot of times companies that are looking to embark on their expansion in the U.S. Need greater time than the initial new one, L-1A, allows. So the franchise can help you leverage that, to meet the requirements, so you have greater time to grow your overseas business in the U.S., if you will. So anyway, let's get started and get to the details. First, let's talk about optional practical training. So for F1 entrepreneurs, there's a lot of things you can do on your OPT when you want to embark on a startup. You can do your preliminary market research. You can secure contracts, meet with potential investors, develop a business plan, set up an entity, go through all the things that you need to do to actively, embark on, setting up your business. You would work with your DSO, because remember, you've got to report to your DSO who you will be working for on your OPT. So you will let them know that this is the option that you want to take, and they can help you structure what you can be doing during your OPT time. So, oops. OPT employment, remember, it's got to be in the area of intended study. So we had talked earlier in Chai Time with Transworld how, because when you think of franchises, I used to think of Subways or McDonald's or something like that, but they're franchises for aeronautical industry. There's franchises for engineering, for medical services, IT. There's a whole array of them so finding one that's related to your field shouldn't be difficult. You've just got to make sure that, you talk to your Transworld advisor and he can help you look for it. And if you're curious as to what type of franchises would work. Shekar Challa's contact information was on our Chai Time webinar, so you can email him, and if you're interested in doing some market research and finding out if there is a franchise that is in your field of study, he can help you do that. Remember, OPT is up for 12 months, and you're allowed self-employment business ownership as long as it is within your student degree program, so it's got to be related. So how can you go about doing this? What's the practical aspect of doing a startup on an OPT? I think earlier we had a question. I don't have a social security number. My social security number has only for work authorized status. Can I go about doing this? Remember, when you embark on, even if it's a franchise or a business, you have to set up a legal entity. And as a non-immigrant, you're able to set up a legal entity. So you would set up a legal entity, and you would obtain a federal employment identification number. A federal employment identification number, FEIN, is to a business what a social security number is to an individual. So you can use that FEIN to set up bank accounts and all the other things you need to do to embark on this franchise path. Now, the OPT is only valid for 12 months. What do I do after that? So you should have a game plan, even if you're going to start it at your OPT, that you think about what the next non-immigrant classification you can hold that will allow you continued work authorized status in the US. So one of the most common methods to think about is, of course, the H-1B. And a lot of people are surprised that you can file a self-petitioned H-1B. Now, we have to remember that H-1Bs are subject to the cap. If you were trying to change status from that of an F1 to an H-1B, so it's not a guaranteed, it's not guaranteed that you'll be secured in H-1B. But, it's very much worth a try. And so you can self-petition an H-1B. And the key issue is, the petitioner for an H-1B has to be a US employer. So they're like, but I'm a non-immigrant and I own the business, so how can I be a US employer? A US employer is defined by a company that is the entity that is set up in the United States. So there's a difference between, you and your business. So the business in that way would be deemed to be a separate entity, and so that entity can, petition for an H-1B. The issue becomes the employer-employee relationship. If you have no one else but yourself, how are you controlling your work? So one of the key things is to have an independent board of directors. Articles of incorporation and the bylaws would actually outline, the right to control and the employment. But that is the secret sauce, is making sure you have a board who will have oversight. So if you have a board that has oversight and you're able to demonstrate through all your entity documents that they do indeed have the power as outlined by the, I say entity, but business formation documents, then you're able to establish that the employee-employer relationship does indeed exist. So you can leverage that. Are there any other options? Well, you might think of an E2. So an E2 is a treaty-based visa. Treaty-based visa where these countries have a treaty with the United States. You have to actively commit funds. You can use an escrow, account, and you can have a memorandum of understanding with the franchise that you would only be committed if indeed your immigration process was approved. So, but you have to show that you're actively engaged in all of this. Even if you're an F1, you can apply for an E2. And the E2 gives you 5 years to grow the business, as opposed to other classifications where you have a lesser time frame. So the E2 is a treaty-based visa. You can apply for a treaty-based visa, changing your status from F1 to that of an E2. What are some of the other things that you consider? Well, first let's talk about the countries that are eligible for E2 right now. So the E2 countries, these are the countries that are eligible for an E2 visa. So if you are a citizen of any of these countries, then, or can obtain citizenship from any of these countries, then you're eligible for an E2 visa. So somebody that would be like, for example, I had a client who was trying to file an L1 from Brazil. I remembered from my own trip to Brazil that a vast majority of Brazilian nationals immigrated from Italy. I had no idea. It's only when I went to a Brazilian restaurant and they had risotto on the menu. I said, this is kind of odd. Why do you have risotto on your menu? And that's when they explained to me. And that little tidbit from that restaurant stuck in my head. So when I was talking to the client, I said, do you happen to have any other citizenship? He goes, well, my grandparents, I'm eligible to get an Italian passport, because Brazil is not one of the countries that's mentioned as an E2 country. But because he had ancestry in Italy, and that allowed him to apply for an Italian passport, he would be eligible for the E2 visa. Also, there may be other ways you can do it. Okay, so how does the E2 work? You can file the E2 directly at the consulate, or you can file a change of status with the USCIS. And typically, if premium processing wasn't halted, it would be eligible for premium processing. If you're filing at the consulate, the processing times vary. There's some consulates where they have to certify the company first before they will allow, they'll process the visa itself. Some places it can take a very short time, some places it can take a very long time. And not all consulates do that. There are some that are quite faster than the others. But you don't have to go to a consulate. If you are in the United States on a valid non-immigrant status, you can file for a change of status in the US. But like I said, you can't just hand them a plan. You have to show that you're actively in the process of investing in a real operating and commercial enterprise. A lot of times I have E2, prospective E2 clients that want to just invest in passive real estate. It's got to be a commercial enterprise. And the business, the test that they use is it must meet something called the substantiality, a proportionality, and a marginality test for investment and growth. What does that mean? Well, this is often another question I get. How much do I invest? How many employees do I need to hire? So these tests answer all those questions. So the answer is it depends. I know that's not what you're looking for, but it's not like an EB-5 where there's a set regulatory amount that you have to invest. So what they want to make sure is, so they use a substantiality test. So depending upon how great the investment amount should be, that dictates how much you need to invest. The higher the investment amount, the lesser you need to, the lesser percentage of the amount you need to invest. If it's a $10 million investment, you'd probably get away with 10%, $1 million. If it is a $100,000 investment, the percentage would go from 10% probably to about 70 to 80%. So the lower the investment, the higher percentage. The higher the investment, the lower the percentage, but you're still paying more money, right? You're still putting in more money to make the investment. So there's the threshold is not based on a specific dollar amount. It is based on the percentage, which is dictated by what the total investment of capital would be. Now, the marginality test, you have to show that you are able to eventually, in the future, generate income that supports more than the treaty investor and their family. That means job creation. That's a nice way of saying it. That's what it means, job creation. But you have 5 years to do that. And How you establish that is typically through a business plan. The great thing about franchises is the franchisor usually has really solid data as to how many employees this particular franchise usually, needs to operate. So that is wonderful evidence to be able to submit during the time you file your E2. Whereas business plans, if it's something that is not really fueled with market analysis, you may get a little resistance as to what your assumptions are. But that's one of the things that you would do, is try to demonstrate within a 5-year period, we will be able to create jobs and create income for more than the treaty investor and their family. So those are the two main issues that you have to look for when you're doing this. What happens if you're not from one of the E2 countries? Are you out of luck? Well, like I said, you could, if you have eligibility to get citizenship from another country, that's one way. You could also consider your spouse's citizenship. Your E2 spouse would be able to be the primary, and E2s, the dependents, can also get work authorization. So it's like two birds with one immigration stone. You both get work authorization, so you could both work together in doing this. Another way is, believe it or not, there are countries out there that will expedite citizenship, E2 countries, because of investment, and they've done very well. And specifically, they do this, I can tell you, because of the E2 visa. Surprise, surprise, where there's a need, there's going to be a market. So citizenship in Grenada may be an option. In most of these countries, these investment citizenship pathways are run by the government, and they have agents and so forth that help facilitate that. But citizenship in Grenada is through their National Transformation Fund. There's donation versus an approved project and real estate option. Investments contributions are usually between 150 to 350,000. There's a government fee for real estate, and you can get the citizenship in about 6 months. So if you got a Grenadian citizenship, then you would be able to use the E2 to come into the United States. That's one country. Turkey has a plan as well. In Turkey, you can put in the bank a deposit of 500,000 for a minimum of 3 years. You can invest in real estate for 250,000, or make a capital investment. Citizenship is granted in approximately 6 months, but the investment's got to be held for at least 3 years in Turkey. Another place, Moldova. They have a public sustainable development fund of Moldova, and investment is determined by a number of applicants, approximately 108 to 168,000. Their government fees range from 1,000 to 5,000 per applicant. Their due diligence fees, to make sure that money is obtained lawfully, runs from 5,000 to 6,000, and a post-approvable government service fee for 35,000 per application. They're pretty steeped in fees, but they make the approval possible in approximately 3 months. That's what you get. Got to pay the price. So because they're doing it so fast, you can, they're able to charge extra fees as a result. So this shows you that E2 is not necessarily closed off to you if you are not primarily a citizen of an E2 country. Take a look at your ancestry to see if maybe you can leverage that to get an E2. You may have a spouse or a girlfriend that could be a spouse that would help you with the E2 process. And finally, if you've got some change, all of these options are still cheaper than the EB5 option, and it would get you an E2 to come into the United States. So we talked about H's and E's. How does this apply to, how do franchises benefit L1s? Well, let's make sure we remember what the L1 is first. An L1 is a multinational it's a visa for a multinational company, a company with an overseas entity and maybe possibly a couple of overseas entities and an entity in the United States, a related entity in the United States. So it can't be any entity. They can't be independent. They have to be either parents, subsidiaries, branches qualify, affiliates, joint ventures. And you would have to have worked abroad in one of the related entities for 1 year within the preceding 3 years. What does that mean? That means it from the time of admission. So let's say you entered the United States on a 2 years master's program, and the year prior to your entry, you worked in the overseas entity. And so as long as it's 1 year within the 3 years preceding admission into the US, so after your 2 year program, you could apply for an L. If you worked for a company that has that qualifying relationship, you would be able to leverage it. And the types of people that can leverage the L are executives or managers. And even though you don't have your family's company or the company you worked for overseas does not have a US presence, there's something called a new office L1A. And so you would be able to open up a new office here in the United States and be able to facilitate utilization of the L1 visa, either as an executive or managerial capacity or specialized knowledge. There's a specialized knowledge L1 as well. Now, for an intercompany transferee as an executive or manager, usually the ones that are doing the startup of a new office L1 are in the executive or manager, type level, because you may down the road petition for specialized knowledge, people with specialized knowledge of the product, but usually to start up a US operation, you really want somebody on the higher executive level. So the new office L1A is initially granted for 1 year. Yep, 1 year. I don't know where they got that 1 year number from, but I don't know of any business publication that would say that a business can grow in 1 year. So it doesn't make real life sense, but that's what it is. So you have to kind of either plan ahead and ramp up. That's what I always tell people. Do you have, a market footprint here already because you've been selling your product from your overseas entity here? Do you have memorandums of understanding? How quickly can you operate? Are you manufacturing or are you sales and support? So these are the types of things you look to see when is the good time to activate the L1. Because in 1 year, when you come up for your extension, you have to be able to demonstrate that you've shown growth. And growth is not defined in the regulations, but I can tell you from USCIS decisions, growth is deemed how many people have you hired? Is the executive, show us if the executive is not engaging in any non-executive duties. I mean, and even that's not real life sense because we all engage in non-executive duties. I engage in a lot of non-executive duties. Sometimes I'll make copies, do this, but I still run the law firm. So they want to see that there is someone to undertake the non-executive duties. So there are some people that will slowly enter the United States on a B1 visa and do the types of things permissible on a B1, filing of the L1A, because what you don't want to do, a lot of law firms, they're just concerned about filing your initial L1A. I always want to make sure that when we file the L1A, new office, that we're already thinking about the extension a year out. Because I don't want neither you nor I to feel like we are suddenly scrambling to make sure that this petition is approved. I mean, I know that these aren't just papers we process. There are kids in school, there are families, there's investments that you've made. So we've got to make sure that we secure your personal and financial investment by looking out for the extension up front. That's where a franchise can come in handy. And recently, you know, I had a client who was, they manufacture really high-tech green air conditioning components. It can help purify the air, and they're lauded, and it's doing really well. They had zero sales to the US so far. They knew that the type of products they had are not available here, and they thought they could do really well. They did that kind of basic market research, but they're not going to be able to grow their operations in 1 year. Certainly not to the level that they can get an extension. So we had thought about perhaps buying a franchise, an air conditioning franchise in the US. The one thing that's really interesting about the L1 US offices is the US business doesn't have to be in the same field or industry or even related in terms of field or industry to the overseas entity. It does have to be related ownership-wise, but doesn't have to be related industry-wise. So, you know, in this particular instance, because they did not have, you know, sales pathways yet, we thought if she obtained a franchise within the air conditioning industry, she'd be able to talk to the franchisor about maybe trying some of her products. That way she'd be able to, you know, because we know how many employees she would need to open up, and she wasn't going to just open up one franchise, she was going to actually open up two, because the two would have given her the requisite growth that she would have needed to get the L extension. And then concurrently, she can leverage this by getting a footprint into the market, because she can talk to the franchisor to see if he'd try her products. So she can try slowly, you know, because she's now in the industry in some capacity, be able to facilitate those sales much better than if she was not. So, you know, franchises that way can provide accelerated growth and revenue, and you can concurrently expand your overseas services to secure market streams in the United States while managing your franchise. That's kind of cool. It's a win-win for both, right? So if any of these, you know, you find interesting or you want to find more information about, if you haven't listened, listen to the Challa Chai Time, where, you know, we talk about immigration matters and masters. So we talk to masters, people who are experts in the industry, about immigration matters. So if you listen to that particular webinar, you can get to learn about what the whole franchising process is about. So you can take what I've told you now and kind of apply it to, well, what do I need to identify a franchise and what's involved and things of that nature. And if you have any questions, email us at info@challalaw.com. And as always, if you have any questions, please make comments. We'd be happy to answer your questions. If you subscribe to our channel, share it with your friends. And so we can, the goal is to make sure that people need to be provided. There's so much information out there, and not all of it is correct. And so what we're trying to do is provide practical guidelines, kind of a map, a GPS to help you achieve your immigration objective. I know, like I said, it's not just papers. It's your life. It's your kid's life. It's being able to sleep peacefully at night. So that was the whole purpose of putting all of this together. So if you like it, spread the love and share and give us your comments and feedback on the webinars. And if you have any questions, you can put your question in a comment or email us at challalaw.com. And hope you all are safe during this pandemic time. And until next time, this is Lakshmi Challa. I look forward to seeing you again. Mondays at 11, we have our weekly COVID updates. Wednesdays, Alternatively, we have either Challa Chai Time with some expert in the field, or we have a program where we talk about immigration stars, immigrants who are making phenomenal contributions to the United States, trying to highlight how great immigration is for this wonderful nation. So those are Wednesdays at 11. So I look forward to seeing you again. Take care. Until then, I'm out.